sometimes statistics are really, really boring, and sometimes they're incredibly interesting and a bit eye-popping. I saw this one. This is courtesy of Pew Research. 56% of liberal white women between the ages of 16 and 29 have been diagnosed with a mental health condition. So wrap your mind around that. Those are just the ones who've been diagnosed. Those are just the ones who've gone to see somebody. Over half. That is, on top of being incredibly sad, that is a jaw-dropping number. And I'd love to hear the professor unpack this one for me. Joining me now, Patrick Keenan, professor of political philosophy at Notre Dame. He's also an author of the book Regime Change. Okay, Patrick, that number is so high it doesn't even seem real. And to know that 56% is on the low end, what are we supposed to make of that?
Jesse, I would actually like to know a little bit more. I'd like to see more of a breakdown of those numbers. But one thing that I suspect, at least, is that there's probably a strong correlation between these diagnoses and probably women who are single, and even men who are single are more likely to exhibit these kinds of pathologies. In other words, one of the things we're seeing is an epidemic of loneliness, of being unattached, of being no longer in some ways embedded and involved deeply in the lives of other people. And unsurprisingly, this leads to all kinds of psychological and health pathologies that I think are rampant among our population today.
Okay, why? Because I agree with you that there is a loneliness epidemic. I see the emails to my show, lonely men, lonely women. Jesse, I can't find someone. Jesse, I'm 30. Jesse, I'm worried I'm never going to get married. Jesse, but I don't understand why. Now, granted, I'm 41 and I missed this whole social media era, but it makes sense to me, Professor, that we should be more connected now than ever before. I mean, my goodness, I can talk to anybody I want to. My phone is a freaking supercomputer. I have access to everything, to everyone. I could hang up here and I could send you a message right here. I guarantee it'd take me 5 seconds. So why are we less connected when we should be more connected?
Well, I mean, your question contains the answer, which is we're married to our technologies, to our phones, but we're not generally as much involved in a deep way, in a sustained and long-term way in the lives of other people. And this is one of the areas where my area of study and my discipline, political science, sociology, shows remarkably consistent findings that maybe the one defining feature of the kind of modern age, the modern age of the advanced liberal democracies, is just the widespread disconnection that people are experiencing. It's disconnection, obviously, in marriage, having children. One consequence of that is people grow up without siblings, without cousins, without extended families. Also, just the decline of what people describe as close friends, and that's really a remarkable finding that we've gone from, in the last 20 years, from roughly people saying that they have 3 very close friends, people you could call at 3 a.m. in the morning and say, come pick me up, or I really need to talk to somebody. 3 really close friends like that to less than 1 on average that people identify today. So again, I think if we're looking at one of the causes of deep forms of kind of mental as well as health pathologies, one area that we should look at with great focus is, why is it as a society we have seemed to make ourselves in an organized and intentional way more and more disconnected from each other. And social media plays a part in that, although it's not solely to blame. This has been a trend that's been occurring for much longer than the invention of the cell phone, of the iPhone, and so forth. So these, I think social media and these kinds of technologies exacerbates and accelerates these trends, but these trends already pre-existed the inventions of those technologies.
Okay, explain that then. And I'm sorry, I just find this to be fascinating, because I'm 100% with you that this is a real, maybe the defining societal problem we have. If it's not just social media, if it was trending this way otherwise, why? Because if I'm home and I'm lonely, whether I'm happy to be married, obviously, but if I'm single or married and I'm lonely, I'll go find some friends. Whether that takes the form of going to a gun range or going to a church or a bar or wherever. People are not difficult to locate, Professor. I'm looking out my window right now. I got people everywhere I can go talk to. Why am I so lonely?
Well, I think this is really the analysis that I've been engaging in the last two books that I've written, Why Liberalism Failed and Regime Change, which is that every regime has a set of priorities and commitments. Every political order and social order and even economic order have a set of priorities and commitments. And even if we're not aware or conscious of those, it's like the water that fish swim in. It shapes our worldview, it shapes our commitments, it shapes how we act and how we manifest ourselves in the world. And the overarching commitment of a liberal society is to be free. Is to be free, not just in the kind of sense of I want to be able to pursue my own interests, to pursue my hobbies, but to be free of the entanglements of other human beings. And more than just other human beings, the entanglements of institutions like communities, localities, churches, religion, institutions like marriage itself, and of course, children that are likely to emerge from those kinds of institutions. And then more broadly, it's freedom from cultures and traditions. And so cultures and traditions become seen or redescribed as these forms of human organization that hold us back, that keep us from becoming the kind of person that we were destined to become. So one of the ways in which our regime functions is to through a kind of very subtle process, dismantle not just these institutions as a kind of formative presence in the lives of human beings, but the kind of deeper, more profound, the kind of those deeper roots of traditions and customs that you might think of as just a way of life of a civilization, and those have been increasingly disassembled or just kind of dissolved in the solvent of modern liberalism. And the result is, in some ways, the successful liberation of people from those institutions, those commitments, those relationships. But then the corresponding pathologies that this study, I think, points to.
So it's no question that a strong family unit, husband, wife in the home, raising kids, that is more likely to be a more right-leaning, call it conservative, Republican, whatever you want to call it. That's going to be a more right-leaning unit. It just is. And as you've pointed out more than once, as people well know, single people, men and women, young, miserable single people, tend to vote Democrat more. So I'm a suspicious person by nature. How much of this destruction of the family and this loneliness epidemic, which is a very fair way to put it, how much of this was done on purpose?
I think it's entirely intentional. I mean, this is I've been in the university, since I was 18 years old, and I don't want to tell you how old I am, but I'm a lot older than 18 now. And it's clear that this has been a central project of the modern intellectual class, the kind of a permanent political class, what we today call the elite, the intellectual, the kind of cultural elite. And it reflects these deeper commitments of this liberal project. Now, I know that you've written a book on communism and Marxism, and this is where a really interesting kind of relationship and even a kind of a symbiosis has arisen between one element of Marxism and one very distinct element of liberalism. And it is this, in Marxism, it's the ideal of human equality. That human equality, the equalization of all things, is the ideal. And in liberalism, it's the liberation of people from those kinds of unchosen and background and traditional bonds that I was discussing. Well, it turns out that part of this project was in some ways to marry the liberal project and the Marxist project. And one figure that your listeners and your viewers might be really interested in is a book that was published in 1970 by a woman, a feminist named Shulamith Firestone, called The Dialectic of Sex. And she argued that Marxism would never be truly achieved until women in particular, but all human beings, were freed from their biology, were freed from being men and women, were freed from the imposition of limitations that nature places upon us, no longer having to reproduce, no longer having to marry, no longer having to be bound to the next generation through childbearing and raising of children. and that this could be achieved through a kind of cultural as well as a technological transformation. This was published in 1970. And when you read that today and you look at the kind of outer edges of the sexual revolution today, transgenderism, the idea that our sexuality is simply alterable through surgery or alterable through our own will, I think you see that the roots of this revolutionary ideology have been planted for at least half a century, if not more, with the aim of being the liberation of human beings from our natures, from each other, from our institutions, from cultures and traditions, and the result being this, the kind of society we're seeing coming into being, which is on the one hand full of people who are radically separate, but on the other hand, increasing a society in which if you resist that form of society, you are now seen as a threat. You are now seen as a threat and a danger to that regime. And the regime is increasingly seeking to oppress those who are opposed to this outcome.
That's very interesting. A society full of lonely people with groupthink. That's pretty much what we have now. Professor, his book is Regime Change. I want to encourage you all to go get it. Obviously, as you can see, he knows his stuff. Professor, thank you so much, sir.
Thanks for having me, Jesse. Appreciate it.
Are you tired of watching your beloved nation fall prey to the insidious grip of communism? The Anti-Communist Manifesto by Jesse Kelly is the ultimate guide to fighting back against this destructive force. Discover the shocking truth about communism infiltrating our education system, corporations, and even environmental movements. Unmask the true agenda behind groups like Antifa and Black Lives Matter and learn how to protect the United States from the most malicious enemy. With extensive documentation of past atrocities, you'll see the undeniable danger posed by this ideology. Arm yourself with knowledge and join the fight to preserve the American way of life. The Anti-Communist Manifesto, a new must-read book from Jesse Kelly. Get your copy today at jessekellybook.com or wherever books are sold.